My girlfriend, Anna, asked for a break to find herself. So I did what any rational, heartbroken person would do. I signed up for a 1-year research contract studying Arctic char in a remote sector of Nunavut, where the only regular internet access is a satellite connection that takes 10 minutes to load a single email. I didn't tell her where I was going. I figured she wanted space. I'd give her all the space in the world, about 2 million square kilometers of frozen, pristine emptiness. It was the perfect plan, a geographic and emotional firewall. I would become a ghost in the machine of the Canadian wilderness, a mere entry in the DFO's personnel files, until I found the note. It was tucked into the pages of my field guide to northern aquatic bird life, a relic from my university days that I'd thrown into my duffel bag at the last minute, a token of a simpler time. The handwriting was Anna's, frantic and looping, nothing like her usual neat print. I know what you're running from. It's not me. Meet me at the Heartbreak Lake coordinates. You're not safe. They're watching. My blood went colder than the permafrost outside my Quonset hut. Heartbreak Lake wasn't on any official map. It was a name I'd made up for a small, isolated body of water I discovered on a topographical survey years ago, a place I'd only ever mentioned to Anna once, in a late-night, wine-fueled conversation about secret places and personal sanctuaries. We'd been lying on the floor of our Halifax apartment, the city light smearing against a window, and I had told her it was my mental escape hatch, a place so pure and untouched it could cleanse any sorrow. And the day part, I worked for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. For God's sake, my biggest threat was a disgruntled seal or a data entry error that would require 3 weeks of forms in triplicate to rectify. Let me rewind and paint the full, pathetic picture. I'm 28, a biologist with the DFO. My life, until 4 months ago, was a predictable cycle of Halifax commutes, lukewarm coffee, and compiling reports on fish stocks that nobody in power ever seemed to read. My job was one of those niche government positions you cling to like grim death, because there are only a dozen like it in the country. Anna, 27, was the beautiful, chaotic variable in my otherwise orderly existence. She was a freelance graphic designer, which meant her work hours were as unpredictable as her moods. In 4 years, I'd watched her cycle through passions for pottery, urban foraging, and learning Finnish, each abandoned with the same vague dissatisfaction. I'd found it endearing once, a sign of a vibrant, curious mind. But after the third time I'd had to help her dismantle a potter's wheel she'd impulsively bought, the charm began to wear thin. Loving her was exhilarating, but it was also like trying to hold on to smoke. The break conversation was a masterpiece of ambiguity, delivered on a Tuesday evening over a dinner of slightly burnt pasta. She loved me, she insisted, her eyes glistening under the cheap IKEA pendant lamp. But she felt stifled by the trajectory of our lives. The future I saw, a house, maybe kids, a dog, seemed to fill her with a quiet dread, a feeling of being boxed in before she'd even figure out the shape of her own soul. She needed to figure out who she was without me. She was going to stay with her sister for a while. It wasn't a breakup, she promised, her hand resting on mine. It was a pause. I felt like a character in her personal play, waiting offstage for my cue to return, my own script for our future suddenly rendered invalid. So I took the cue and left the theater. The Nunavut position was a Hail Mary pass I'd thrown after a particularly depressing evening staring at the ring box in my sock drawer. The job was isolated, physically demanding, and intellectually stimulating in a way my old desk job wasn't. It was a perfect antidote to heartbreak. No distractions, no reminders, just raw, unforgiving nature and the silent, judgmental gaze of the aurora borealis. I sold my furniture, broke my lease, and didn't look back. I left Anna a voicemail. She didn't pick up, of course, telling her I was taking a new job and that she had all the space she needed. I didn't say where. For 3 months, it worked. My life shrank to a simple, satisfying routine. Check the ice thickness gauges, take water samples, monitor the wildlife cameras, and try not to freeze my fingers off. My only human contact was with my base manager, a grizzled Inuit man named Elijah, who spoke in grunts and profound, weather-beaten wisdom, and the twice-weekly radio check-in with the regional DFO office in Iqaluit. The silence was a balm. The heartbreak was still there, a dull, persistent ache, but the sheer physicality of survival and the stark beauty of the place kept it at bay. I was starting to heal. Then, during a 4-day blizzard that trapped me inside with nothing but canned beans and my own thoughts, I pulled out the BirdLife Guide, seeking a distraction. The note fluttered to the floor. It had been slipped into the book before I'd even left Halifax, which meant Anna had planted it there, predicting my retreat, knowing I'd eventually find it in my isolation. The implications made my head spin. What wasn't I safe from? Who was watching? And why Heartbreak Lake? I tried to dismiss it as one of Anna's dramatic flourishes, a desperate attempt to reinsert herself into my narrative. But the specificity of the coordinates gnawed at me. It felt like a puzzle box, and my innate scientist curiosity, the very same drive that made me good at this job, wouldn't let me leave it unopened. Against my better judgment, and after a particularly cryptic radio conversation with my boss, Alistair Finch, in Victoria, who seemed unusually interested in my mental well-being and any unusual biological findings, I decided to go. Finch's voice, usually smooth as polished stone, had a new, sharp edge to it. Remember, Dan, any anomalies at all, you report directly to me. We must maintain data integrity. The phrase data integrity sounded like a threat. I told Elijah I was doing a 3-day solo survey of a previously unmapped watershed. He just looked at me with his deep-set eyes, his face a roadmap of wrinkles carved by decades of Arctic wind, and said, "The land knows your intentions. Don't lie to it." It was more words than he'd strung together in a week, and they hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. The journey to Heartbreak Lake was a 2-day trek by snowmobile and then on foot, through a landscape so stark and powerful it felt like walking on the moon. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe, and the silence was a physical presence, broken only by the crunch of my boots on the snow and the occasional deafening crack of distant ice. My mind raced, cycling through memories of Anna, her laugh, her frustrated tears when faced with menu, the way she'd look at me sometimes as if I were a complex equation she couldn't quite solve. Was this all an elaborate, misguided attempt at a grand romantic gesture? Or was there something real, something dangerous, waiting for me? When I finally crested the ridge and looked down at the lake, a perfect, frozen oval nestled between jagged, snow-capped peaks like a jewel in a crown of ice, my breath caught in my throat. The beauty of it was almost painful. And there she was. A small, brightly colored alpine tent was pitched at the edge of the stunted tree line, a thin, determined wisp of smoke curling from a portable stovepipe. Anna was outside, bundled in a massive red parka that looked brand new, her face pale and pinched with cold, a smudge of soot on her cheek. She looked up as I approached, her expression a mixture of triumph and sheer, unadulterated terror. She looked older, the indecision in her eyes replaced by a grim resolve. "You came," she said, her voice barely a whisper, snatched away by the wind. "You left a note inside a book I hadn't opened in years. You basically mailed an invitation to the middle of nowhere." I replied, my voice flat, my own emotions a tangled knot of anger, concern, and a treacherous flicker of hope. "What the hell is going on, Anna? What is this? Are you stalking me now?" She took a shaky breath, her gloves fumbling with the strap of her backpack. "It's about your work, Dan. The fish. The data you've been collecting." I stared at her, bewildered. "The Arctic char? What about them? They're fish. They swim, they eat, they reproduce. It's not exactly a thriller plot. It's not just about the fish, she said, her eyes darting around the barren landscape as if expecting snipers to emerge from the snowdrifts. It's what's in the fish. Your boss in Victoria. He's not just a government bureaucrat. He's a gatekeeper. This was descending into full-blown paranoia. Anna, my boss is a man who uses a ruler to align the pens on his desk and gets genuinely excited about new types of spreadsheet software. What are you talking about? His name is Alistair Finch. Did you ever look into his background? She asked, her voice gaining a frantic, desperate edge. She pulled a tablet from her backpack, its screen protected by a heavy-duty case. Before the DFO, he was a high-level executive at Nix Chronos, a private bioengineering firm. They specialize in proprietary genetic research, mostly for agricultural applications, but they have a dark history. Environmental contamination, cover-ups, silencing whistleblowers. They were the ones behind the green silence pesticide that wiped out entire pollinator populations in the Midwest, but they buried the data for years. A chill that had nothing to do with the Arctic air crept down my spine. Nix Chronos. I had heard the name, always in hushed, negative context at conferences. How do you know this? How could you possibly know this? After you left, I was a mess, she admitted, her gaze dropping to the snow. I was lost. I started going through your things, looking for, I don't know, a clue to where you'd gone, something of you to hold on to. I found your old work laptop in the closet. You'd forgotten to wipe it. She had the decency to look ashamed. I was just missing you. I started reading your old project files, your emails. I found a chain between Finch and someone with a Nix Chronos email address. It was heavily redacted, but they were talking about Project Chimera, tertiary biomatter extraction, and priority sample acquisition from the designated northern sector. Your sector, Dan. The dates lined up perfectly with the preliminary reports you filed about the abnormal hormone levels and behavioral changes in the char population here. I remembered it clearly. I'd mentioned it to her once over dinner, frustrated. The data is weird, Anna. The char is showing elevated levels of synthetic corticosteroid analog, and they're exhibiting atypical aggression. It's like they're on Piscine steroids. I thought it was a fascinating anomaly. She nodded absently, probably thinking about a new font she was trying out. I did some digging, she continued, her words tumbling out now. I used the skills I had learned from my brief, disastrous stint in investigative journalism in college. I found leaked internal memos from Nix Chronos. They were developing a synthetic growth hormone, something designed to accelerate biomass production in livestock. It was highly unstable. There was a spill, a containment breach at a remote testing facility that fed into a northern water system almost exactly a year ago. They covered it up, called it a minor HVAC malfunction. Your data is the proof. You're not just counting fish. You're monitoring the aftermath of their disaster. And Finch is their man on the inside, making sure the final DFO report is sanitized, that the anomalies are written off as natural phenomena or testing errors. I thought of Finch's unusual, pointed questions during our last radio check-in. Any further anomalies in the char, Dan? Any aggressive behaviors? Unusual biological markers? It's crucial we have a complete picture before the final report goes to the minister's office. I thought he was just being a meticulous manager. Now it sounded like an interrogation. Why here? I asked, gesturing to the frozen lake, this place that had been my secret sanctuary. Why these specific coordinates? Because this is the epicenter, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. I cross-referenced the leaked Nix Chronos facility schematics and spill reports with your topographical maps and your own water current models. The initial breach was upstream from here, in a valley that drains directly into this watershed. This lake, is a control sample. Dan, the fish here, according to all the models, should be pristine, uncontaminated, if they're showing the same markers. She didn't need to finish. The implications were terrifying. A proprietary, genetically modified pollutant was not just present. It was pervasive, loose in one of the last truly pristine ecosystems on Earth, and a multi-billion-dollar corporation was actively covering it up. So they're watching, I murmured, the pieces clicking into a horrifying picture. It wasn't a vague, paranoid day. It was Finch. It was Nix Kronos. Finch is, Anna confirmed. He knows you're a good scientist, a thorough one. He knows you might actually find the truth, connect the dots. That's why he was so eager to approve this remote posting for you, away from the main office, where you're isolated and your communications are limited and easily monitored. He can control the narrative. He can lose your data, misinterpret your findings. If you became a problem. She left the threat hanging in the frigid air. Just then a low mechanical hum began to echo through the valley, a sound utterly alien to this place of wind and wildlife. We both looked up, our heads snapping toward the sound. A small, sleek, unmarked helicopter, painted in nondescript gray, was approaching from the south, its skis barely visible against the gray, woolen sky. It was flying low and fast, directly toward us, a predator homing in on its prey. Anna's face went a shade whiter. They're here. Elijah's words echoed in my mind. The land knows your intentions. We had told a lie about a watershed survey, and now the land was sending the consequences in the form of a corporate gunship. The helicopter didn't land with a gentle touch. It hovered aggressively, then descended near our position, its rotors kicking up a blinding, suffocating cloud of fine, crystalline snow. When the rotor wash finally settled, the scene felt surreal, like a frame from a movie. Two figures climbed out. One was my boss, Alistair Finch, looking absurdly out of place in a designer, fur-trimmed parka that probably cost more than my monthly salary. The other was a large, silent man with a jaw like a slab of granite, his posture and cold eyes screaming private security or something even less savory. Dan, fancy meeting you here, Finch called out, his voice artificially jovial, but his eyes, as I could now see clearly, were as cold and dead as the ice underfoot. We were in the area for a routine site inspection. Had to check on our star researcher. His gaze then slid to Anna, and the false warmth vanished completely. And you must be Anna. We've heard so much about you. Quite the little sleuth. Your digital footprints are extensive. My heart was hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs, a trapped bird fighting its cage. Alistair, what's going on? This is a routine inspection. Let's not play games, Dan, Finch said, the corporate mask slipping entirely. You have data. Unauthorized, misinterpreted data. And you, he nodded at Anna, a flicker of contempt in his eyes, have been accessing confidential, secure DFO systems and engaging in corporate espionage. That's a series of federal offenses that could see you in prison for a very, very long time. This isn't about offenses, I said, finding a courage I didn't know I possessed, my voice shaking but clear. This is about Nix Kronos, about Project Chimera, about the spill you're covering up. You're poisoning this entire watershed. Finch's expression tightened into a grimace. You have a very active imagination, son, fueled by what heartbreak? Project Chimera is a revolutionary step in sustainable biofuels. A minor, contained incident is not worth jeopardizing the future of the planet over. Your data is flawed. The anomalies are natural variances. You will hand over all your physical samples and field notes, and you will sign a revised report that I have already prepared, which clearly states that your initial findings were inconclusive and likely the result of instrument error. And if I don't, I challenge, though I felt anything but challenging inside. The large man took a deliberate step forward, his heavy boots crunching in the snow. The threat was unspoken, but as palpable as the freezing temperature. He didn't need to say a word. It was Anna who spoke next, her voice surprisingly steady, cutting to the tension like a knife. She stood her ground, her chin raised. I didn't just email myself the files. I sent them to an encrypted, secure server with 3-factor authentication, and I set a dead man switch. A timer. If I don't log in and reset it every 48 hours, everything, the emails, the internal Nix Chronos documents, the schematics, the coordinates of this lake, my entire research journal, gets automatically and simultaneously sent to the Globe and Mail, the CBC, and the RCMP's Federal Investigations Unit. It was a bluff. It had to be a bluff. The Anna I knew could barely remember to water her plants, let alone orchestrate a complex dead man switch with encrypted servers. But she delivered the lines with such cold, unwavering conviction that even I, for a terrifying second, believed her. This wasn't the indecisive Anna I had left in Halifax. This was someone new, forged in the fire of her own mistakes and this insane crusade. Finch stared at her, his face a mask of cold, calculating fury. He was a corporate man, a risk assessor. He was weighing the credibility of this unpredictable woman against the catastrophic PR, disaster, and stock plunge that would follow such a leak. The standoff felt like it lasted an eternity, the only sound the relentless wind whipping across the lake, scouring the land clean. Finally, he let out a short, harsh laugh that held no humor whatsoever. You two are a pair, aren't you? A regular Bonnie and Clyde of ecological trivia. He turned his venomous gaze back to me. You're fired, Dan. Effective immediately. Breach of contract, gross insubordination, unauthorized disclosure of sensitive information. You will be escorted back to base to collect your personal effects and then flown out on the next charter. Your career with the DFO, and I will make sure this is over. He then looked at Anna, his eyes narrowing. As for you, if one word of this slanderous fantasy appears anywhere, in any media outlet, on any blog, I will bury you in litigation until you are nothing but a memory and a cautionary tale. We own the patents on the genetic sequence of the compound in question. You will never be able to prove it wasn't a naturally occurring substance. You'll just look like a disgruntled, unstable ex-girlfriend who couldn't handle a breakup and fabricated a conspiracy theory to get attention. There was nothing more to say. We had lost. They watched, their eyes like gun barrels, as we packed our gear in silence. The flight back to the base in the vibrating, noisy belly of the helicopter was a silent, tense affair. They confiscated my field notes, my water samples, my camera's memory cards. True to his word, Finch had me on a charter plane to Iqaluit within hours, a pariah being expelled from the garden. The fallout was swift and quiet, handled with the brutal efficiency of a corporate machine. I received a formal termination letter by courier at my temporary hostel in Iqaluit, citing gross misconduct and actions unbecoming a public servant. My professional reputation, the one I'd carefully built for years, was in tatters. Anna and I returned to Halifax together, bound not by rekindled romance, but by the shared, surreal trauma of our experience. We tried for a few weeks to pick up the pieces, to see if the old embers would still glow, but the ghost of what happened, the betrayal, the fear, the immense pressure, lay between us like a third person in the room. The grand, dramatic reunion on the edge of the world couldn't fix the fundamental cracks that had always been there. We had a long, sad, and final conversation in the same cramped Halifax apartment where it had all begun. The city noise outside a jarring contrast of profound silence we left behind in the north. We saved the world a little bit, didn't we? She asked, a faint, weary smile on her lips. In our own messed-up way. I think we just made a couple of powerful enemies and lost our jobs. I replied, "The cynicism is a shield for the hurt." But I returned her smile, a real one this time, full of a strange, hard-won respect. "But we tried, Anna. You were brave. You were so damn brave." We parted as friends, with a deep, abiding respect that had been missing before. She continued her therapy, focusing on her own stability, on turning her chaotic energy into a focused force. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she started a successful niche blog about corporate accountability and environmental activism, using her graphic design skills to create devastatingly effective infographics about industrial cover-ups. She had finally, it seemed, found a passion that wouldn't be abandoned. As for me, I was done with fish, done with the government, done with it all. The world of forms and triplicate felt like a sick joke, but the land itself still called to me. In a surprising turn of events, Elijah, my old base manager, reached out to me a month later. He'd heard what happened through the tight-knit northern grapevine. He offered me a job not with the government, but with his own community's council, teaching local kids about traditional Inuit land stewardship and combining it with modern scientific principles. It's not a government salary. There are no pensions or benefits, but it's honest work. It means something. The ring I'd once carried, the symbol of a future that had crumbled to dust, I sold it to a jeweler in Halifax who asked no questions. I used the money to buy a reliable second-hand truck for my new life, shuttling between communities in the vast, beautiful north. Sometimes, under the vast, starry Nunavut sky, the air so clear you can see the ghostly veil of the Milky Way, I think about Anna's note. "You're not safe." She was right, but not in the way she thought. The real danger wasn't just a corporate conspiracy. It was a quiet, insidious tragedy of a love that couldn't withstand the weight of its own potential, of two people who needed to break apart to finally become whole. We didn't get the happy ending, the Hollywood embrace in the snow, but we both finally got a true beginning. And in the end, that was the only thing that mattered.